Hi, I'm Ann V. Brady, and I'll be reading an excerpt from my book, A New Beginning, the story of my adoptions, life, and service, illustrated by Eric C. Brady. Appendix. It has a 1 up next to it, and it says source, which is Adoptee Rights Law Center. http://adoptee rightslaw.com. It should be https://adoptee-rightslaw.com. I will put it below in the comments. Okay, I've included the laws from when this book was written, which was published from last year, for the rules and regulations for the states on whether you can get your original birth certificate, the age you can get your original birth certificate, and whether you can get your adoption file. This also includes Washington, D.C. Okay, Alabama, you have to be 19 to get your original birth certificate. You can get your original birth certificate, and as far as your adoption file, you need ID with the consent of parent or court order to get your adoption file. Alaska, you have to be 18 to get your original birth certificate, and yes, you can get your original birth certificate. As far as your adoption file, non-ID/ID info per court order. Arizona, age to get your original birth certificate, 18. In order to get your OBC, the adoptees born between June 20th, 1968 and September 28th, 2021 can't get their original birth certificate without a court order. And you need a court order and a compelling court need and the court will decide what info, if you get any. Hold on a second. Oh, that's better. Okay, Arkansas. Age to get your original birth certificate is 21. Yes, you can get your original birth certificate, but the birth parents can have their names redacted. As far as your file, adoptee, you can get an adoption decree for $100. Birth parents can sign a contact form. In other words, whether they want you to contact them or not. California. Age to get your original birth certificate, 18. Getting your original birth certificate is restricted. You have to petition the court. As far as your adoption file, must have written authorization from the court, must have good cause. Parents can redact their names from the original birth certificate if you get your adoption folder. Colorado, you need to be 18 to get your original birth certificate. And yes, you can get your original birth certificate, but it'll be a non-certified original birth certificate. As far as your adoption file, identifying info upon request. ID info with birth parent request / adoption records. Court order for health and medical records of the birth parents. Okay. Delaware, you have to be 21 in order to get your original birth certificate. And yes, you can get your original birth certificate, but birth parents can veto the request, and they have to renew the veto every 3 years. Okay, you can get your adoption file through court order, and the judge okay, and it says court order and can cause prejudice to the parties involved. I'm not sure what that means. Okay, Washington, D.C., you have to be 18 to get your original birth certificate, and that's by court order. And you have two different courts that you can go to, apply to it for. Adoption file. Court order unless adoption is before August 25th, 1937. Probably because they figure the birth parents are dead by then. Okay. Florida. You can get your birth certificate possibly at age 18. There was a question mark there, so I'm not sure about that. Getting your original birth certificate by court order, birth parent consent, or birth parent is dead. Court order for your adoption file. They have a registry for FARR, which is the Florida Adoption Reunion Registry, and it's a mutual consent registry where both the birth parents and the adoptee can sign whether they want to be contacted or not. Okay, Georgia, you have to be 21 in order to get your birth certificate. And you can get your birth certificate, original birth certificate, by court order. Also, your adoption file is by court order. Adoption, they have an adoption search registry through a nonprofit agency. Hawaii, you have to be 18 to get your original birth certificate. And yes, you can get your original birth certificate unless the adoptee is born in Hawaii but adopted in another state. In that case, you have to go to the other state where the adoption occurred in order to get your original birth certificate. And as far as your adoption file, yes, you can get your adoption file. Okay, Idaho, you have to be 18 in order to get your original birth certificate. Now, to get your original birth certificate, it's by court order or state operated voluntary adoption registry. Release dependent person state of adoption, consent of one or both parents, and redactions. Law applies to adoptions finalized on July 1st, 2022, or after that date. Law takes effect 2039. It doesn't really tell you much about what before those dates. And the adoption file, no, the records are sealed by the court or if requested by adoptive parents. Not sure whether it's identifying information or non-identifying information. Illinois. In order to get your original birth certificate, you have to be 21. And adoptees born before January 1st, 1946 can get the original birth certificate, but there's no unrestricted access to original birth certificate for anyone born on January 1st, 1946 or after that date. They may not get their original birth certificate due to denial of info exchange. And the adoption file, the courts are sealed except by court order. Okay, Indiana, the age is 18, but if you want identifying information on your birth parents, you have to be 21 to get the released. The original birth certificate, they have an adoption matching registry that you have to join in order to get your original birth certificate with release of identifying information per birth parent before July 1st, 2018. I think that has to do with the adoption had to occur before July 1st, 2018. Anything after that is probably courts decide or no, you can't. As far as the adoption file, not available unless ID info may be released through adoption matching registry. Okay. Iowa, you have to be 18 in order to get your original birth certificate. To get your original birth certificate, there's no unrestricted right to original birth certificate from 2021 on. Birth parent can request redaction of their ID info. Adoption file. Court can release birth parents' names at request of adoptee and for good cause. Okay, Kansas, you have to be 18 to get your original birth certificate. And yes, you can get it with $20 with a notarized requesting letter. And you can get your adoption file by court order. Kentucky, the age for your original birth certificate that you can get it is 21. And you can't get your original birth certificate unless it's by court order. And as far as your adoption file, court order or consent of the birth parent. Louisiana, you have to be 24 to get your original birth certificate. You can get your original birth certificate. And as far as adoption file, only by motion of disclosure has a voluntary adoption registry, age 18. In other words, you need a motion of disclosure and you have to be on their voluntary adoption registry. And you have to be at least 18 to be signed on to the registry. Maine, you have to be 18 to get your original birth certificate. And yes, you can get your original birth certificate. And your adoption file, yes, but only for adoptions finalized before August 8th, 1953. And they have a voluntary adoption registry. Maryland, you have to be 21 in order to get your original birth certificate. And yes, you can get your original birth certificate, but only adoptions finalized on or after January 1st, 2000 or court order. And they have a mutual consent voluntary adoption registry. And adoption file, yes, you can get it for your adoption file for adoptions prior to 1947. Massachusetts, you have to be 18 in order to get your original birth certificate. Now, they changed the rule because when I went, you had to get a court order to get your original birth certificate. But now you can get your original birth certificate. Now, as far as your adoption file, you get a non-identifying information with ID info through court order or permission of birth parent. Oh, and they didn't put it in this, but Massachusetts does have an adoption registry. Okay, Michigan. You have to be 18. You have to be 18 to get your original birth certificate. To get your original birth certificate, maybe, yes. Maybe you can get your original birth certificate. Yes, you can before, if the adoption occurred before May 28th, 1945, and on or after September 12th, 1980. Between May 28th, 1945 and September 12th, 1980, no, if the birth parent is alive and denied release. Weird. Adoption file, only by court order. Minnesota, age 19 to get the original birth certificate. And you can't get not until July 1st, 2024, can an adoptee get the original birth certificate. And it's after that date, so you should be able to get it. State law requires birth parents to release info and release their original birth certificate even after death. Well, even after death, birth parents can deny a request for the adoptee to get their adoption file or any info. Mississippi, age 21 in order to get your original birth certificate, and you can only get your original birth certificate by court order. And adoption file, yes, with birth parent consent, with counseling, and only for adoptions after July 1st, 2005. Okay, Missouri. You have to be 18 to get your original birth certificate. Yes, you can get an original birth certificate but a birth parent can restrict the release of the original birth certificate. And in order to get your adoption file, it has to be a court order or the birth parent is dead. Montana, you have to be 18 in order to get your original birth certificate. And yes, you can get your original birth certificate for adoptees adopted 30 or over 30 years ago. Those adopted greater than 30 years ago by court order. Those adopted on or after October 1st, 1997, court order. You need a court order only by written request, and you have to be 18. As far as your adoption file, court order or birth parent is dead. Oh, sorry, by court order. Nebraska, you have to be 21 to get your original birth certificate. Before September 1st, 1988, yes, with consent of the birth parent. September 1st, 1988 to July 20th, 2002, yes, unless the birth parent doesn't consent. After July 20th, 2002, adoptive parents have no say. Adoptee parents have no say. Also, the adoption file is by court order only. Okay, Nevada. You have to be 18 to get your original birth certificate. And you can get your original birth certificate by court order. Adoption file, you can get court order, adoption agency, or Nevada's Adoption Reunion Registry. New Hampshire, you have to be 18 to get your original birth certificate. Yes, also birth parent contact information form and health history questionnaire. So you can get your original birth certificate. Adoption file, only by court order. New Jersey, you have to be 18 and to get your original birth certificate. And you can get your original birth certificate, but until December 31st, 2016, birth parent could redact identifying info. Okay, adoption file, court order, birth parent can file contact preference form. New Mexico, you have to be 18 to get your original birth certificate. Court order, at time of adoption, an amended certificate is not required. And then adoption file by consent of birth parent or court order. New York, you can be age 18, and yes, those adoptees adopted in New York and adopted outside New York can get the ID info that would appear on the OBC. As far as the adoption file, court order, exceptions may be an adoptee born in another state but adopted in New York. Okay, North Carolina, you have to be 18 to get your original birth certificate. And yes, you can get it by either consent of the parties involved or court order. And as far as the adoption file, court of adoption decides whether you can get the file or not. Have confidential intermediaries to help. Ohio, you have to be 18 or 21 after September 17th, 1996. So basically 21. And yes, you can get your original birth certificate for adoptions before January 1st, 1964. Between January 1st, 1964 and September 17th, 1996, ID info can be redacted by the birth parent request. After September 17th, 1996, yes, unless a birth parent has filed a denial of release. And you need a court order to release your adoption file. North Dakota, you have to be 16 in order to get your OBC. You can get your OBC through court order and your adoption file through court order. Oklahoma, you have to be 18 in order to get your OBC. As far as your OBC, by court order for those adopted before November 1st, 1997. After November 1st, 1997, yes, unless birth siblings under 18 or birth parent denies access. Court order for your you can get your adoption file through medical consent. Yes, you can get your adoption file through mutual consent, voluntary registry, or court order with good cause. Oregon, you have to be 21 to get your original birth certificate. And yes, you can get your original birth certificate. And your adoption file, most available to 18-year-olds upon request. There may be limited information in your adoption file. Pennsylvania, you have to be 18, have a GED, high school with diploma, legally withdrawn from school if under the age of 21. And you will get a summary of your original birth certificate. And the birth parent can file a name redaction request. Your adoption file, yes, through the Adoption Information Registry. Rhode Island, you have to be 18 in order to get your adoption file, your original birth certificate. And yes, you can get your original birth certificate. Then they have a voluntary adoption reunion registry regulated by the court. Birth parents may file a contact preference form. South Carolina, you have to be 18 in order to get your OBC or original birth certificate. And you can get your OBC by court order or birth parent consent. As far as your adoption file, by court order, ID info released if adoptee is 21 through a state administered adoption reunion registry. Everyone agrees and everyone undergoes counseling by the adoption agency. South Dakota, you have to be 18 to get your OBC. And yes, you can get your OBC. And your adoption file, yes, through the state DSS, Department of Social Services, and the court. Okay, Tennessee, you have to be 21 in order to get your original birth certificate. And yes, you can get your original birth certificate, except in cases of incest or rape of birth parent, requires consent of birth parent. And yes, you can get your file through adoption records process, $150 plus 25 cents per page. Texas, you have to be 18 to get your original birth certificate, and you can get your original birth certificate by court order. And your adoption file can be gotten by court order with good cause. Utah, you have to be 18 in order to get your original birth certificate. And through Utah's adoption registry with birth parents' consent or they're dead. That's how you can get your original birth certificate. Adoption file by court order or info on a mutual consent voluntary adoption registry. Vermont, you have to be 18, 16 if you're an emancipated minor to get your original birth certificate. Yes, you can get your original birth certificate. Adoption file, only through Vermont Adoption Registry or court order. Virginia, you have to be 18 to get your OBC. You can get your OBC either through state agency or court order with good cause. Adoption file, non-ID info with request to Department of Social Services or DSS. Washington, you have to be 18 in order to get your original birth certificate. You can get your original birth certificate if the birth parent hasn't filed denials or no disclosure. As far as your adoption file, by court order with good cause. Confidential intermediate intermediary program. West Virginia, you have to be 18 in order to get your original birth certificate. You can get the original birth certificate by court order. By law, an adoptee can file a dissent to the adoption in the court that the adoption was filed in within 1 year after turning 18. The adoption can be vacated. Adoption file. Participating in voluntary adoption registry or court order. Okay, Wisconsin. You have to be 18 and you can only get through your original birth certificate through consent or death of birth parents. And your adoption file only through Adoptions Record Search Program or court order. Wyoming, 18 is the age you have to be to get your original birth certificate. And you can get the original birth certificate by court order. And as far as the adoption file, court order, confidential intermediary, state supervised, can access adoption records and ID info leading to contact with birth parent if all consent. And that is the end of my book. For everyone concerned, I hope you have a great day and enjoy the evening. Please buy my book at Amazon.com.